It said that there are two justice systems in America. In one, the law is a hammer. It comes down fast, and it comes down hard, shattering lives over small mistakes, sometimes for no other reason you just don't have the money. In the other system, the law is a negotiation. It's flexible, it's forgiving, and it's for sale. Now, the price isn't listed on any court docket, but it's paid every single day in this country. It's paid in million-dollar legal teams, in secret plea deals, and in the quiet, comfortable jails that are reserved for a select few. This is the story of how that second system works. It's about how, in a country that promises equal justice for all, having money can buy you a completely different kind of justice, leaving everyone else with systemic failure, distrust, and deep, deep inequality. This is Kalief Browder. Back in 2010, at just 16 years old, he was walking home in the Bronx when police arrested him for allegedly stealing a backpack. His family couldn't afford the $3,000 bail. So, without ever being convicted of crime, he was sent to Rikers Island, one of the most violent jails in the country. For 3 years, he just languished there. He was beaten by guards and by other inmates. He spent nearly 800 days in the torture of solitary confinement. After 3 years, prosecutors finally admitted they didn't have a case, and they dropped all the charges. Kalief was released, but the kid who went in was gone. The trauma he suffered was a new prison he couldn't escape. 2 years later, Kalief Browder took his own life. His freedom was priced at $3,000, but it ended up costing him his life. And this is Ethan Couch. In 2013, the same year Kalief was finally released, 16-year-old Couch stole some beer, threw a party, and got behind the wheel of his dad's truck. His blood alcohol was 3 times the legal limit for an adult. He was flying down the road at 70 in a 40-mile-per-hour zone when he lost control and plowed into a group of people, killing 4 and severely injuring 9 others. It was a horrifying, senseless tragedy. But at his trial, his lawyers argued that he wasn't really responsible. A psychologist testified that Couch was a victim of his own privilege, suffering from what they called affluenza, the idea that his super-wealthy upbringing made him unable to understand consequences. Instead of the 20 years in prison prosecutors wanted, the judge gave him 10 years of probation and a stay at a cushy rehab facility. 4 people dead, and not 1 day in a prison cell. Both boys were 16. Both broke the law. But the outcomes are night and day. One life was destroyed over an unproven accusation, while the other was excused after a drunken rampage killed 4 people. So how is it that in a system that promises equal justice for all, wealth can so often buy a totally different result? This isn't just a story about a couple cases. It's about a set of deeply ingrained tools that let the rich play by a different set of rules. To really get how this happens, you have to look past the courtroom drama and into the machinery of the legal system itself. It's in the boring procedures and financial transactions that justice so often goes off the rails. It happens in 4 phases: buy your freedom before trial, buying the best lawyers, buying a lighter sentence, and, if all else fails, buying a better prison. For most people, the first and most critical moment in the justice system is bail. Bail isn't supposed to be a punishment. It's just a guarantee that you'll show up for your court date. But in reality, it's become a system that punishes people for being poor. On any given day in America, hundreds of thousands of people are locked in jail just waiting for their trial. As of mid-2023, that number was about 467,600. And remember, these people have not been convicted of a crime. Many are there for one reason, and one reason only. They are too poor to afford their bail. Just think about Kalief Browder. His family couldn't get together $3,000. And that one financial hurdle led to 3 years of absolute horror. This isn't some rare event. All across the country, people are held for weeks, months, or even years for minor offenses because they can't pay a few hundred or a few $1,000s. In that time, they lose their jobs. They lose their homes. Their families are thrown into chaos, and the pressure to just get out becomes overwhelming. Prosecutors know this. They use this pretrial detention as leverage, offering a deal: plead guilty and you can go home today. It doesn't matter if you're innocent. When you're faced with waiting in a dangerous jail for a trial that's months away, or just taking a guilty plea to a lesser charge, so you can be free A lot of people take the deal. Studies in places like St. Louis have shown that most people who plead guilty to misdemeanors do it just to escape pretrial detention, often without ever talking to a lawyer. Their guilt is never proven. It's coerced. Now, let's look at the alternative. A wealthy person gets arrested. They might spend a few hours in a holding cell before their lawyer shows up. Bail, even if it's set in the hundreds of thousands or millions, is just a business transaction. They go home to their family. They sleep in their own bed. They keep running their business. And most importantly, they can actually help build their own defense, meeting with their legal team for hours, gathering evidence, and preparing for trial from a position of freedom and strength. Their life is disrupted, sure, but it's not destroyed. The starting line isn't even in the same place. One person is forced to run a marathon with weights on their ankles, while the other gets a limo ride to the finish line. Once you're out on bail, the next big advantage money buys is obvious: access to the best lawyers. The Sixth Amendment guarantees you the right to an attorney, but it says absolutely nothing about the quality of that attorney. A public defender might be dedicated and passionate, but they are almost always drowning in an impossible caseload. It's not uncommon for them to have hundreds of active cases at once, giving them just a few hours or sometimes just minutes. For each client, they're overworked, underfunded, and they simply don't have the resources to launch the kind of defense a rich client can afford. Compare that to a private, top-tier legal team. We're not talking a few $1,000s here. For serious felonies, legal fees can easily pass $50,000, and for complex white-collar crimes or high-profile cases, that cost can run into the hundreds of thousands or even millions. So what does that money buy? It buys a team of experienced lawyers, paralegals, and investigators. It buys the best expert witnesses, forensic specialists, psychologists, jury consultants. This legal army can file an endless storm of motions, challenging every single piece of evidence. They can bury prosecutors in paperwork, exploit every little rule, and drag the process out for years. They can run their own deep investigations, finding holes in the prosecution's case that a public defender would never have the time or money to even look for. The case of Jeffrey Epstein is a masterclass in how money and power can bend the system. When he was facing a federal investigation in 2007 for sexually abusing dozens of underage girls, his powerhouse legal team, which included Alan Dershowitz, cut a secret deal with federal prosecutor Alexander Acosta. This non-prosecution agreement was unbelievable. In exchange for pleading guilty to much weaker state charges, which got him just 13 months in a private wing of a county jail with work release every day, the federal government agreed to drop its entire investigation and grant immunity not just to Epstein, but also to his powerful, unnamed co-conspirators. The victims were never told about this deal, a move that a judge later ruled was illegal. The Justice Department's own internal investigation later called the decision poor judgment, but found no official misconduct. Epstein's wealth bought him a legal shield that was, for years, unbreakable. Even when a wealthy person is convicted, the fight isn't over. Money and status still play a huge role in the final sentence. This is most obvious in the massive gap between how our system treats white-collar crime versus street crime. Someone convicted of a nonviolent drug offense or robbing a store for a few $100 can face years, even decades, in prison, especially with harsh mandatory minimum sentencing laws. Take the case of Marion Hungerford, a first-time offender struggling with severe mental illness. She was a getaway driver in a series of robberies where less than $10,000 was stolen. Because a gun was involved, a gun she never even touched, she was sentenced to 159 years in federal prison. The judge himself said he wanted to give her 7 years, but his hands were tied by the mandatory sentencing laws. Now, compare that to a corporate executive who commits fraud that costs investors millions, wiping out the life savings of thousands of families. Their crime is huge, but it's often seen as less serious because it's not physically violent. They are far more likely to be seen as good people who just made a mistake. They can afford psychologists to talk about their good character and charity work. And as a result, they often get sentences that are shockingly light compared to the damage they caused. The affluenza case laid this bare. Ethan Couch killed 4 people, but his wealth wasn't just a part of his childhood. It was the entire basis of his defense. The argument basically, was that he was too rich to be held accountable. And it worked. The judge chose therapy over prison. This sent a chilling message. If you have enough money, even causing multiple deaths can be twisted into a psychological problem, not a crime that deserves punishment. It's a defense that will be laughed out of court for a poor kid from a rough neighborhood. For them, a tough upbringing is seen as a predictor of crime, not an excuse for it. For the tiny fraction of wealthy people who actually do get sentenced to prison, the inequality doesn't stop there. A whole industry has popped up to cater to them, offering a type of jail time that's a world away from the dangerous, overcrowded conditions most inmates face. These are called pay-to-stay or private jails. In several cities in California, for example, someone convicted of a misdemeanor can pay a fee, usually between $100 and $165 a day, to serve their time in a smaller, cleaner, safer city jail instead of the notoriously violent county jail. These places often offer amenities like private cells, work release programs so they can keep their jobs, and easier visitation rules. The Santa Ana City Jail in Orange County openly advertises its pay-to-stay program as an option for people who want to avoid the negative effects of jail on their careers and family. It's like an a la carte menu for punishment. If you can afford it, you can buy yourself safety and comfort. If you can't, you're sent to face the violence and neglect of an underfunded public jail. This practice creates a literal two-tiered system of punishment. Even when held accountable by the law, the rich can buy a better, safer, more dignified experience. The punishment itself is a luxury good. These tools bail elite lawyers, sentencing loopholes in private jails, aren't just a string of unlucky coincidences. They're symptoms of a much deeper, systemic problem. The American justice system isn't just influenced by money. In many ways, it's designed to run on it. The profit motive in justice. Over the last few decades, a massive for-profit industry has wrapped itself around our criminal justice system. Private prison companies, which now hold nearly 100,000 people in the U.S., have a direct financial reason to keep beds full. Some even have contracts with states that include occupancy quotas, requiring the state to keep the prison at 80% or 90% capacity or pay a penalty, which creates a powerful lobby for tougher sentencing laws. And it's not just prisons. The bail bond industry makes its money directly from the desperation of poor families. Companies that manage prison phone calls and commissary accounts charge insane prices, sucking billions of dollars every year from some of the nation's poorest families. An entire ecosystem of nearly 4,000 companies profits from mass incarceration. When you turn punishment into a business, the focus is no longer on justice or rehabilitation. It's on revenue and profit margins. And that will always favor those with money and punish those without. Laws written for the wealthy. Another huge systemic failure is just how complicated our laws are, especially when it comes to finance. The laws around tax evasion, securities fraud, and money laundering are so incredibly complex that they're almost impossible for a normal person to understand. This complexity is a feature, not a bug. It creates countless loopholes for high-priced accountants and lawyers to exploit. When a wealthy person or a corporation is accused of a complex financial crime, prosecutors know they're in for a fight. They know the defense will have unlimited resources to challenge everything. A full trial could cost millions of dollars and take years, with no guarantee of conviction. So, it's often easier and politically safer for prosecutors to just agree to a settlement. The corporation pays a fine, which might sound big, but is often just a fraction of their profits and treated as a cost of doing business, admits no wrongdoing, and the executives who plan the whole thing face no personal consequences. This is how the system is designed to work. For the wealthy, a fine is often the final price. For the poor, a loss of freedom is the only currency the system accepts, the power of influence. And finally, wealth buys influence. It lets the rich donate to the campaigns of the same judges and district attorneys who might one day hold their fate in their hands. It lets them hire powerful lobbyists to push for laws that benefit them, whether that's weaker financial regulations or more favorable tax codes. This influence isn't always some secret, illegal conspiracy. It's about access. It's about being in the same social circles as the people who write and enforce the laws. And research backs this up. The social status of a victim or a defendant can have a real impact on how a case is handled. For instance, studies have shown that prosecutors are more likely to seek the death penalty in cases with white victims from prominent families, while crimes against people from marginalized communities get far less attention. This sends a clear message about whose lives and whose losses the system values most. So, let's go back to our original question. How can a system built on the idea of equality produce such wildly different results? The answer is that we've created a system where justice isn't treated like a fundamental right, but more like a product on a shelf. From the moment of arrest, every single step of the process has a price tag. Whether you can pay your bail determines your freedom. Whether you can hire a dream team for hundreds of thousands of dollars can determine your guilt or innocence. Your social status can affect your sentence. And if all else fails, you can even pay to do your time in a safer, more comfortable jail. Kalief Browder's life was destroyed over the accusation of stealing a backpack, a crime he was never convicted of, because his family didn't have $3,000. Ethan Couch killed 4 people, and his family's wealth became the very reason to keep him out of prison. These aren't just tragic outliers. They're the logical results of a system where money is the single greatest predictor of your fate. When justice is for sale, it isn't justice anymore. It's a luxury good, available only to the highest bidder. It becomes a tool to maintain the social order, protecting the powerful and punishing the vulnerable. The real cost of the system isn't measured in dollars, but in the erosion of the most fundamental promise a society can make, that no one is above the law. And in that transaction, where the rich buy their way out and the poor pay with their lives, we all lose faith in the idea of justice itself. What are your thoughts on this? Does our system truly deliver equal justice for all? Let us know in the comments below. And if you believe these stories and this conversation are important, subscribe for more deep dives into the systems that shape our world.